Hi friends, it's Dodge with The Puppy Place, Bitsy. Chapter 4. Charles could not stop smiling all the way home. He still couldn't believe that it had happened, that his family was going to be fostering Bitsy. Mom had worked it all out with Cicely, and now Bitsy lay curled up in his lap as Mom drove. The tiny puppy seemed to trust him already, since she had fallen fast asleep by the time he had buckled himself in. Charles stared down at the tiny dog. How could anything be so little? Her eyes were little, her nose was tiny, her paws were, oh, those paws. Charles reached out a finger to touch one of Bitsy's feet. They looked just like regular dog paws, only miniature. It's like somebody shrunk a dog, he said to Mom. She's just so small. Mom laughed. I know, she said. This will really be something new for us. We'll have to make sure that the bean is extra gentle with this puppy. I wonder what she eats, Charles mused. Like probably one piece of kibble is a whole meal for her. I wonder what Buddy will think of her, said Mom. Will he even understand that she's a dog, just like him? Good thing he knows about being gentle, too, said Charles. Buddy was always great with their foster puppies. He shared his toys, didn't mind if they ate his food or drank out of his water bowl, and was always ready to play. Charles looked down at Bitsy. La 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 la, he sang softly. She opened one eye and wiggled her tiny tail. That sounds nice. Do more. Charles laughed. I think she likes music, he said, or at least she likes my singing. He hummed a little more of the tune, and Bitsy sat up in his lap and wriggled happily. Look at her, he said. She really does like it. I guess you are. I guess you and she are a good match, then, said Mom. You've really been into music lately. Charles remembered what Mrs. Davies had told him. I forgot to tell you, he told his mom. I saw Mrs. Davies at the store, and she said I should join the Littleton Chorale for their next show. That sounds like fun, said Mom. I've always wanted to do that. I love to sing, too. Maybe we could join the chorus together. Really? Asked Charles. That would be cool. He'd never done anything like that with his mom. I'll call Mrs. Davies after dinner and find out more about it, said Mom. But first. She pulled into the driveway. Let's get Bitsy settled into her new temporary home. Normally the Petersons like to let new foster dogs out into their fenced backyard. The dogs could run around and get used to the new smells, do their business, and have their first meeting with Buddy outdoors, where there was more room to roam. But Charles could see that for Bitsy, the backyard would seem like a vast wilderness. She could get lost out there, maybe disappear beneath a rose bush and not be seen for weeks. He decided to keep her on her leash for the time being and take her inside through the front door. Come on, girl, he said. Let's go meet everyone. He held her carefully as he got out of the van, and then gently put her down on the ground. The rocks lining the driveway towered over her like giant boulders, and the front walk seemed as wide as a superhighway. But Bitsy did not seem fazed. She trotted along at the end of her little leash, wagging her teensy tail and sniffing at the ground, just like a regular dog. She even squatted and peed on a tiny clump of grass. Good girl, Charles said. He bent way down to give her a gentle pat. When they got to the front steps, Bitsy stopped for a second to gaze at the sheer cliff in front of her. She turned to look up at Charles. A little help here? Charles laughed. Of course! The stairs, so easy for Buddy to bound up, were way too high for tiny Bitsy. He scooped her up and held her close to his chest as he climbed the stairs and opened the door. Buddy came galloping toward him for his usual happy greeting, but Charles stepped back. Uh-oh, Buddy, he said. Easy, boy. Sit. Wait till you see what I have here. Buddy sat down and thumped his tail eagerly as Charles came inside and put Bitsy down on the floor. Bitsy looked up at Buddy, her brown eyes sparkling. Hey, big boy, let's play. Buddy looked like a giant next to Bitsy, but he was a gentle giant. He stretched out his neck and the two dogs touched noses. Bitsy sniffed him, then went into a play bow with her tiny paws outstretched in front of her and her tiny butt in the air. Then she took off, skittering across the wooden floors of the hall and tearing into the living room with Buddy galumphing along behind her. Bitsy ran straight for the basket full of dog toys. She leapt at it, didn't quite make it, leapt again, and jumped right in. Charles cracked up. Bitsy looked like a toy herself, sitting there, surrounded by all of Buddy's well-worn playthings. She opened her tiny mouth and grabbed at Mr. Duck, the most well-worn of all, then tried to shake the toy just like a big dog would. Mr. Duck was so much bigger than Bitsy that the toy barely moved, but Bitsy didn't seem to care. She just wagged her tiny tail and growled her tiny growls, and Charles could tell that she already felt right at home. Chapter 5. Me, my, moo, moo, Charles sang. He wanted to giggle because the words sounded so silly, but everyone around him was singing the same syllables, and nobody else was laughing. Good. Next, start on this note, said the man sitting at the piano. Mr. Craig was his name, and he was the chorus director, Mrs. Davy's friend. He struck a high note, a note higher than the note before, and everyone sang the same nonsense syllables on that pitch. Me, my, moo, moo, they chorused. Charles looked over at Mom and raised his eyebrows. She smiled and shrugged, mouthing the words along with everyone else. She and Charles had both been nervous as they drove to their first rehearsal, but they had decided to give it a chance and see how they liked it. The Littleton Chorale was a whole new thing for Charles, but so far it turned out that he liked it a lot. Mr. Craig was funny and nice. The other singers were helpful and friendly, and even though they had only begun warming up, Charles was enjoying the singing. The only bad part was missing Bitsy, who was home with Lizzie and Dad and the Bean. Charles knew Bitsy was getting plenty of attention, since the whole family was crazy about her, but he hated to miss any time with her. Everything Bitsy did was funny and different. From the way she barked, she sounded like a squeaky toy, to the way she drank. She lapped up water one drop at a time from a tiny bowl Mom had filled. She had settled in nicely, and she loved the little bed Charles made for her out of a shoebox lined with one of his oldest, softest t-shirts. Charles could picture her now, snuggled into her bed. Did she miss him like he missed her? Me may, my mo moo, sang Mr. Craig, playing an even higher note on the piano. The chorus followed along, singing with him. Then he went down the scale, playing each note on the piano as the chorus sang. Great, he said when they finished. Now you're all warmed up and ready to sing, right? Right, everyone yelled. Charles liked how enthusiastic the singers were. They were all ages, from kids even younger than him to gray-haired grown-ups much older than Mom. The only thing they had in common was their smiles. Charles could tell that everyone in that room really loved to sing. We'll start with a song that everybody knows, said Mr. Craig. Let's sing it together first. Then we'll divide it up into parts and try some harmony. Do you all know what harmony is? Charles looked around. Everyone was nodding. Everyone but him. Mr. Craig must have noticed. Harmony is when one person sings on a note a little higher or lower than the note another person is singing, he explained. The two notes blend together in a way that can sound really nice. Or not, if you hit the wrong note like I always do, called out a man near Charles, and everybody laughed. Charles was beginning to realize that he had a lot to learn about music. That became even more clear when Mr. Craig passed out some printed sheets for the song they were about to sing. When Charles had sung in the play, Mrs. Davies had handed out papers that just had the words to the song. This time, the sheets had a lot more than words. They had lines drawn across them and oval black marks marching up and down the lines, and lots of other marks and squiggles that Charles couldn't make sense of. He looked over at Mom. She smiled. Don't worry, she mouthed. Don't worry if you don't know how to read music, said Mr. Craig practically at the same moment. Just follow along with the words. Listen to your neighbor standing next to you, and try to get a feel for the way the song goes. That's all we're doing right now. Charles looked at the title at the top of his sheet. Do, Re, Mi, it said. He knew that song. It was from one of Mom's favorite movies, The Sound of Music. He'd watched the movie with her so many times that he'd memorized all the songs. Maybe this wasn't going to be so hard after all. Ready? 1, 2, 3. Mr. Craig struck a chord on the piano, and the chorus began to sing. Charles sang along with everyone else. Mr. Craig smiled and nodded encouragingly as his long fingers raced over the piano keys. Charles grinned as he sang. He liked hearing all the other people singing around him. That was really fun. At the end of the song, Mr. Craig lifted his hands off the piano and applauded. "Terrific," he said. "You all sound just wonderful. Now, let's try it again with a little harmony. Altos, you'll lead us off with this melody." He played some notes on the piano and sang along. "Then the tenors come in with this line," he said, and played different notes. Charles froze. Altos? Tenors? He had no idea what those words even meant. "And if you don't know what I'm talking about, just keep singing and see me after rehearsal," Mr. Craig said, as if he was reading Charles' mind. "We'll figure out where you fit in." Charles followed Mr. Craig's directions and did his best to keep singing. By the end of rehearsal, he was worn out and ready to go home to Bitsy. But Mom grabbed him and brought him up to see Mr. Craig. "Mrs. Davies told me to expect you two," said Mr. Craig. "Welcome. I hope you had fun." "I did," said Charles, "but I don't understand about the notes and harmony and tenors and altos and stuff." Mr. Craig laughed. "Music is a whole other language," he said. That was it. Exactly. Another language. There was something about those little black marks and squiggles that made Charles very curious. It was like when he learned to read books. At first, the letters didn't mean anything. Then, magically, they had become words. Suddenly, Charles wanted to learn to read music the same way he had learned to read letters. "I'd like to learn," he said. Mr. Craig smiled. "When I was your age," he said, "I took piano lessons and learned to read music. It was the best thing that ever happened to me. Would you like me to teach you?" Charles looked at Mom. She nodded. "Yes, I would," he said. And that's the end of that. Stay tuned for Chapter 6.